I'm gonna make this very simple for you, Dan. Men should not play sports against women. I'm not gonna get into all the bullshit that's going on out here in the world today. If anybody thinks that, I think they're stupid. I'm not, like I say, I support the gay community 100%. I support the transgender community 100%. But I do not, under any circumstances, under zero, think that men should play sports against women. And if anybody have a problem with that, they're going to have to get over it, because I'm not going to change. I just think it's wrong, period.
Which are what? The science behind this, that men and women are different. And you can call yourself a woman, you can call yourself a cat, call yourself whatever you want, but the facts are what? Trans women are men. And the W in WNBA stands for women.
Before the game, you had a conversation with Sophie Cunningham.
I did.
If you want to share what you talked
Absolutely
about, feel
not.
free. But
Absolutely not.
more of my question is just how important is it to have those like in-person conversations with people that
I think it's
have
great.
different
Yeah.
views?
I think it's great. I think both of us understand that we have platforms, and we both talked about wanting to, more than anything, educate. And there are some things that
Charles Barkley just said the thing most of sports media was too nervous to say. Not in a careful, hedged, both sides have valid points way that gives commentators cover when the backlash arrives. Not with the kind of diplomatic softening that makes a statement technically audible while draining it of any actual meaning. He said it the way Charles Barkley has said things his entire career, directly, without blinking, and with the specific impatience of someone who cannot believe the conversation around an obvious point has gotten this complicated. Men should not play sports against women. I'm done. That was his verdict. Delivered on the biggest sports talk platform in television, in front of millions of viewers who had been watching this controversy build for weeks without hearing that specific combination of words from anyone with that specific level of platform. Right now, the clip is everywhere. Every corner of sports media is processing what it means that the most prominent voice in basketball commentary just planted his flag on the same ground Sophie Cunningham has been standing on alone since her ESPN interview set off a national firestorm. The booing at road games, the banners in arenas, the co-owner who confronted two teenage girls over a thank you sign and left one of them in tears, the pre-game moment between Sophie and Griner that nobody saw coming, the growing coalition of voices from the NFL, the NBA, and Olympic sports all adding their weight to the same side of the argument. We are breaking down every layer of this story right now. And by the end, you will understand exactly why the conversation Barkley stepped into is not cooling off anytime soon. The specific words Charles Barkley used matter as much as the fact that he said them, and the tone he delivered them in matters almost as much as the words themselves.
You don't see trans men going and saying, I want to play football. I want to play basketball. I want to be. Why there's no trans men going into men's spaces? Why is it trans women that's going into women's spaces? Show me the last time a trans man was on a podium in any sport. Show me the last time a trans man won in cycling, cross country, football. They played on the team, volleyball team. Track and field, 4x100 meter relay on track and field, steeplechase, name it. Show me a trans man that have been competitive. Show me one. Show me one.
He did not frame his position as one reasonable interpretation among several. He did not acknowledge the complexity of the conversation and then carefully navigate toward a qualified middle ground that would give him somewhere to retreat if the reaction got uncomfortable. He said men should not play sports against women. He said he does not think that is controversial. He said some debates on television make him look at the screen and say, yeah, men should not play sports against women, and then immediately disengage because there is nothing on the other side of that argument that he is interested in entertaining. He said, I am not going to argue about it. I am not going to change my mind. And he said it with the flat finality of someone who has genuinely assessed the question and arrived at a conclusion they have no interest in revisiting under social pressure.
But I'm never going to think it's all right for men to play sports against women. And I don't even think that's controversial. That's the thing that's funny. Like some of this stuff make, like when you see these debates on television, like, yeah, men shouldn't play sports against women. I'm done. I don't want to hear you try to explain it to me. No, I don't want to hear it. I'm not going to argue with you. Men shouldn't play sports against women. I'm done.
That combination of directness and finality is what separated his comments from the kind of vague public positioning that most media figures have been deploying around this subject for the better part of 2 years. Plenty of prominent voices have found ways to express general sympathy for Sophie's position without saying anything specific enough to generate a concrete backlash. They acknowledge that fairness in women's sports is an important topic. They note that reasonable people have strong feelings on multiple sides. They land in a place that reads as sympathetic to Sophie without ever saying plainly that they agree with her. Barkley did not do any of that. He said the thing directly, without the qualifying architecture that most commentators build around sensitive subjects, and the directness is precisely what gave it the impact it generated.
Why the fuck are y'all booing Sophie Cunningham at every game now, man? This is what we doing to Sophie, trying to villainize this woman when all she did was what, stand up?
His warning to the league carried weight that went beyond the fairness debate itself. He said something close to, "Y'all need to be very careful how you handle this," pointing at the specific danger of a professional league attempting to discipline or punish a player for expressing an honest opinion in response to a direct question from a reporter. That warning is substantive rather than rhetorical because it touches on a genuinely important institutional question about what the limits of league authority over player speech should be in a professional sports context. If the WNBA moves toward visible consequences for players who express policy opinions on this specific subject, the precedent it sets affects every player in the league on every subject going forward, not just this one. Barkley was naming that risk explicitly and doing it in a way that put the league on notice that the sports world was watching how it chose to handle it.
All of the crazies out there are now protesting her at WNBA games. So much so that a coach from another team pulled Sophie aside to have a few words with her and just let her know what she had thought about what Sophie said. Guys, Sophie Cunningham is probably the most popular athlete in the WNBA. If she goes bye-bye, there is no more WNBA. Additionally, have you ever seen Sophie Cunningham play ball before? What on earth makes y'all think that she cares about a bunch of crybabies complaining about an 80-20 issue? Literally, no one wants men and women's sports. It is highly unpopular, and the only people that do want that are people who have likely never played sports before in their lives. So
the platform he said it from amplified everything. Inside the NBA is not a niche sports commentary show with a dedicated audience of basketball specialists. It is one of the most watched sports programs in American television, with a viewer base that extends well beyond the hardcore NBA fan demographic into the general sports audience that dips in and out of professional basketball coverage depending on what is happening. Saying this specific thing on that specific platform guaranteed a reach that no WNBA broadcast or post-game press conference could have produced independently. By the time the clip had circulated for 24 hours, it had been seen by audiences who had not previously been following the Sophie Cunningham story at all and were now entering it for the first time through Barkley's front door.
Super respectful. We were just holding our signs and cheering for both teams. And this lady, older lady, comes up to us, and she comes up to us, and at first I think she's gonna be nice, and then she asks like, "What are you guys doing?" Something like that. And then it was like, "Jesus loves everyone." That's what she told us, and I was like, "Oh, I know." Like, I'm really just like, I know. Like, I know. Nice. Yeah, and she's like, "Oh, I hope Jesus can forgive you for what sin you've done," and like something like that. And then she told us that we were effing insane, and she's like, and she went like insane. Yeah. She's like, you better stop this and stop pulling this. Yeah. And for you guys, I hope God can save you. Yeah.
She said for you to come here and pull this shit.
Yeah.
She said the word.
Yeah.
Did she say effing insane or?
No, she said the word.
And nobody around you spoke up for you.
No.
I will say, Annalie, when I came over, you were in tears.
Yeah, I've never been yelled at like that. I mean, I've had people hate on me on the internet, but like it doesn't really affect me as much because it's just people online.
Before examining everything that has built up around this controversy, it is worth going back to the original moment that started it, because the distance between what Sophie Cunningham actually said and what the reaction to it suggested she said is one of the most revealing aspects of the entire story. She was asked a direct question by an ESPN reporter about protecting young girls who should not have to compete against biological males in sports. She answered it directly. She said what she said. She said she thinks it is common sense. She said she will always believe in protecting children, including little girls who are involved in that category. She referenced Title IX as the legal framework that exists specifically to protect opportunities for women in athletic competition. And she delivered every word of it in a tone that contained no anger, no targeting of any specific individual, and no language that could reasonably be characterized as an attack on anyone. That is the full extent of what she said. A policy position on biological sex in athletic competition, expressed in response to a direct question, without name-calling, without mockery, and without any of the inflammatory framing that typically characterizes comments that generate weeks of sustained national controversy. She said she believes biological women deserve protected competitive spaces in sports. She said she stands by that belief. She said she is not going to change it, and then she stopped talking and let the reaction develop.
Sophie Cunningham has said that males, biological males, do not belong in women's sport. That's it. That is the rational, sane, commonly shared stance. It's a safety issue. It's a fairness issue. It's not an anti-trans kids campaign, but this coach saying, oh, trans kids are well... This is what they do, the straw man argument. She is trying to say that Sophie is against trans kids and she's excluding them and this is evil. No! It's so dumb, it's so evil, it's so calculated. And this is how they silence people.
The framing she chose around love rather than exclusion is the element that kept catching people off guard each time it was examined closely. She said she does not dislike anyone. She said she thinks there is room for everyone. She said she genuinely believes in treating every person with kindness regardless of where they fall on any of the cultural divisions that the current conversation tries to impose. And then, in the same breath, she said she believes biological women have rights in sports that need to be protected and that she will never falter in that belief. The warmth of the surrounding language and the firmness of the core position existing simultaneously in the same statement is what made it impossible to dismiss as a rant from someone who had not thought carefully about what they were saying. This was considered, this was deliberate, and the consistency with which she has maintained it across every subsequent appearance has confirmed that the original statement was not a slip of the tongue that she privately wished she could take back.
So she just says what's true. She says common sense thing, and she gets so much backlash. She's like, men should not be playing in women's sports. Why is that so, I don't get it. I don't understand it. It's a simple statement. She stood by it. That's what I love about when people say things. Don't back down. If you say something, stand by it. And she said it. She backed it up. She's not backing down no matter how much heat she gets from certain people. It's an 80-20 issue. 80% of the country think it's true, 20% don't. The 20% is crushing her. Let them. Who cares? But I love that she didn't back down. I love everything she stands for. She plays hard. She's good. Like I said, I don't watch WNBA, but I like those two girls right there. Yeah, she's going to get backlash from the girls around her and other teams. And, it's a liberal and mostly gay league, which is fine. I have no problem. My daughter is gay. No problem. I got no problem with that. I got no problem with that. But the way they push things on people, sometimes I don't like it in the WNBA. That's why I'm not a big fan of watching their games and supporting it.
Every time reporters have pushed her to walk something back, to add a qualifier, to soften the language in a way that would give the people calling for consequences somewhere to point to, she has responded by restating the same position in the same calm tone. She said what she said. She stands on it. She will always believe it. That consistency under sustained pressure is itself a form of character demonstration, and the sports world has been watching it accumulate across every press conference and social media post since the original interview aired.
We're trying to almost weaponize the word kid and children to, dig deep on the feelings of people instead of the facts, which are what? the science behind this, that men and women are different. And you can call yourself a woman, you can call yourself a cat, call yourself whatever you want, but the facts are what? Trans women are men. And the W in WNBA stands for women. So I just hate it when words like that are weaponized. And Sophie Cunningham made it very, very clear from day one, when, by the way, she didn't bring this up. She was asked by an ESPN reporter about this topic, and she answered. And then as the controversy brewed, she went on Twitter and said the same thing, which is, I am not trying to exclude anyone. Everybody is welcome at my table, but this is the WNBA.
The organized crowd response to Sophie Cunningham at road games has reached a level of intensity that is genuinely unusual for a professional sports controversy that originated entirely off the court. Every time she touches the ball on the road, the booing begins. Not scattered individual boos from fans who happen to feel strongly about the subject and expressed it spontaneously in the moment. Organized, sustained, loud enough that broadcast microphones pick it up clearly, and commentators calling the game have to acknowledge it in real time because pretending the crowd noise is about basketball has become impossible. The Portland game became the clearest example because the booing was so consistent and so loud throughout the game that it became its own storyline separate from the competitive action on the floor.
Not even a little. Dan, she went out of her way to say, I love everyone. This is about science and fairness and protecting women. Because guess what? Until recently, women, we had our own sets of grievances. We couldn't vote. It wasn't that long ago. You really put it in the context of the history of the world. Women couldn't vote. We couldn't get, checking accounts without the husband's signature. All of these things women fought for. Women to be able to be in the workplace. All of these things. Now that we've gotten those things and we've evened the playing field, somehow there's this other level of grievance come. It's always about grievance. And this is protecting what we've earned, not about hating on anybody else.
Sophie's response to it has been the response that competitors give when they have decided that the scoreboard is the only reply worth making. She hits shots, she plays defense, she competes at the same level she would compete at if the arena were completely silent, and she lets the performance answer the question of whether the crowd noise is affecting her in any meaningful way. It is not, at least not in any way that shows up in her play. And the specific frustration that comes from trying to disrupt a competitor through organized crowd pressure and watching them hit shots right back at you while the scoreboard moves in their favor is a specific kind of unsuccessful strategy that tends to run out of energy faster than the crowd that started it imagined it would. The banners that have appeared at multiple road venues add a visual dimension to the crowd pressure that goes beyond the booing. Signs with messages designed to shame her for the ESPN comments, held up in sections where cameras will find them during broadcast, represent a level of organized opposition that the WNBA has not typically seen directed at any single player over an off-court statement. Arena security has had to get involved more than once when things escalated between fans holding opposing signs. The fact that the opposition to a player's policy opinion has organized itself to the degree that it is generating security incidents at professional basketball venues tells you something about how far this has traveled beyond the original interview that started it. The thing that fans watching all of this have repeatedly noted is the specific irony of trying to punish Sophie for saying something through the mechanism of making road games uncomfortable for her. She is a professional athlete who has spent her career competing in hostile environments. The idea that organized booing is going to produce a public recantation from someone who has maintained her position calmly and consistently through weeks of national controversy reflects a fundamental misreading of the competitor being targeted. She has been answering the booing the same way she answered the original backlash, by showing up, competing, and letting the results speak. The moment that shifted this story from a sports controversy into something with real human victims at its center happened at a Seattle Storm game, and it did not involve either of the players at the center of the debate. Two teenage girls came to the game with a sign. The sign said thank you to Sophie for speaking up for girls in sports. No hostility on it, No attack on any player or person, no language that could reasonably be characterized as anything other than fans expressing gratitude toward an athlete whose public position they agreed with. They were courtside, they were not disrupting anything, they were doing what fans have always done at professional sporting events, showing up to support the position of a player they admire. Celeste Caton, a Seattle Storm co-owner, approached them. What followed has been documented through the account of the girls themselves and through footage that subsequently spread across every platform. Caton told the girls their presence was insane. She invoked religion in a way that the girls described as condescending and accusatory. She told them that God can save them. She used language that the girls described as far more aggressive than the edited version that circulated in initial reports, including profanity that one of the girls confirmed was directed at them directly. By the time Caton walked away, one of the teenagers was in tears. Not upset in the way that a person gets when someone disagrees with them online. In tears in the way that a young person gets when an adult with power decides to make an example of them in a public space and nobody around them steps in to make it stop. The league's response to what Caton did arrived only after the video spread far enough to make continued silence institutionally untenable, a fine and a suspension, announced after days of public pressure rather than in the immediate aftermath of an incident that had been captured on video and was already generating widespread condemnation. The timing of that response, calibrated to the volume of public pressure rather than to the severity of what had occurred, is itself a data point about how the league has been managing this entire controversy from the beginning. Reactive rather than proactive. Measured against the external noise level rather than against the standard of what the situation warranted from the moment it was documented. Sophie's response to the Caton incident became almost as widely discussed as the incident itself, and for reasons that reflected well on her rather than badly. She posted publicly that people can disagree and still be kind to each other. She praised the two girls specifically, calling out their courage for standing up for what they believe in. She called Caton's behavior embarrassing and said it showed the type of leader she is. Direct criticism delivered without escalating to demands that exceeded what the situation required. And she went further, saying she would personally reach out to the two teenagers, turning an ugly incident into a specific human gesture rather than a platform for further controversy. That response is the Sophie Cunningham that the people watching this story carefully have been observing throughout. Calm, specific, proportionate. Willing to criticize what deserves criticism without inflating the criticism into something larger than the moment requires. The contrast between how she has carried herself throughout this entire saga and how some of the people reacting to her have conducted themselves is not subtle, and it has not gone unnoticed by the audiences following the story across multiple platforms. Barkley's comments opened a door that other prominent sports voices had been standing at the edge of for weeks, and once he walked through it, the line behind him moved quickly. Brian Urlacher was among the first football voices to add his perspective, stating plainly that he did not understand why an honest opinion about competitive fairness in women's sports was being treated as a scandal that required organized punishment. His framing was direct and unsurprised, the reaction of someone looking at the situation from outside the specific cultural environment of the WNBA and finding the intensity of the backlash disproportionate to what actually triggered it. Football audiences who had not been following the WNBA storyline closely started engaging with it through Urlacher's comments, which extended the story's reach into a demographic that the original controversy had not fully penetrated. Kendrick Perkins took a more measured approach, but landed in a place that consistently supported Sophie's right to have answered the question the way she answered it. His specific contribution across multiple television appearances was the observation that he had covered athletes saying far more inflammatory things about far more sensitive subjects over the course of his broadcasting career, and that none of those situations had generated anywhere near the level of organized backlash that Sophie's calm, consistent, policy-oriented answer to a direct reporter question had produced. That comparison between what Sophie actually said and what the intensity of the reaction implied she had said became one of the more effective arguments circulating in the conversation because it forced people to look directly at the gap between the two. Shaquille O'Neal's contribution was characteristically brief and characteristically direct. He said the situation had been blown out of proportion by people looking for something to be outraged about, and he said it with the specific dismissiveness he reserves for controversies that he thinks are consuming more attention than they deserve. O'Neal's cultural reach extends beyond the sports commentary audience that follows inside the NBA specifically, and his dismissive framing gave permission to a segment of the broader audience to step back from the intensity of the debate and apply proportionality to their assessment of what had actually happened. Sage Steele approached it from a broadcaster's perspective rather than a former player's, and her specific contribution was the defense of the two teenage girls that the Catan incident had put at the center of the story. Steele has been outspoken on issues around fairness in women's sports for years, and she framed her response to the co-owner confrontation around a basic standard of adult conduct toward young people that she argued Catan had violated regardless of where anyone stood on the underlying debate. Her read was that Sophie had never crossed the line between expressing an opinion and attacking a person, and that the reaction to her comments, particularly what happened to the two teenagers, said more about the current climate than it did about anything Sophie had actually said or done. Riley Gaines publicly thanked Barkley for using his platform in the way he used it, approaching the story from the women's sports advocacy lane she has occupied for years, rather than from a sports commentary perspective. Her endorsement of his comments connected the WNBA controversy to the broader national conversation about competitive fairness in athletics that has been running at every level from high school track to Olympic qualifying events, and it brought audiences who follow that conversation specifically into the WNBA storyline for the first time. The retired swimmer and women's sports fairness advocate angle mattered because it connected what was happening in professional basketball to a pattern of incidents across multiple sports that had been generating their own conversations in their own communities without previously intersecting with the WNBA narrative in a direct way. Gaines and others working in that advocacy space had been making arguments about competitive biology in sports for years, and Barkley's comments gave those arguments a prominent new platform through the association with his specific cultural authority in the sports world. The coalition supporting Sophie's position has been loud and has come from prominent places, and it would be a less than honest accounting of this story to present it as one-sided. Current WNBA players and a handful of coaches have pushed back with genuine conviction, arguing that Sophie's comments, regardless of their stated intent, contributed to a hostile environment for teammates, opponents, and staff within the league who fall outside the biological binary her position describes. This argument is not frivolous, and it is not coming from people who have not thought carefully about what they are saying. It is coming from people who work in the same professional environment Sophie works in, and who are telling you directly that the specific words she chose have made their daily experience inside that environment feel different than it did before she said them. Some sports commentators on other networks have pushed back specifically at Barkley, arguing that he walked into a conversation he does not fully understand and used his platform to oversimplify something that deserves more nuance than a few television minutes can accommodate. That critique has some merit in the specific sense that the policy questions around transgender athletes in professional sports are genuinely complex and involve scientific, legal, and ethical dimensions that are difficult to capture in the kind of direct, binary framing that Barkley tends to prefer. The complexity of the underlying question does not disappear because the most prominent voice to weigh in expressed a preference for not engaging with it. Several WNBA players have publicly distinguished between respecting Sophie as a competitor and disagreeing with her framing, saying they believe the conversation about inclusion in athletics deserves a depth and care that a soundbite from a post-game interview does not provide. That position reflects genuine thoughtfulness about how difficult conversations should be conducted in professional environments, and it is a position that deserves acknowledgement alongside the more emphatic support Sophie has received from outside the league. The split is real. It involves real people with real professional stakes in how it resolves. And the fact that it exists makes the story more honest than a version that presents Sophie's position as universally endorsed by everyone who has thought about it carefully. What the split also demonstrates is that the subject she raised at the podium is one the sports world needed to have out loud in public, with names attached, precisely because the complexity of it requires that kind of direct engagement rather than the institutional management through silence that the WNBA had been attempting to apply before Sophie made that approach unavailable. Brittney Griner's contribution to the public conversation around this controversy landed in a genuinely ambiguous place, and the ambiguity is worth sitting with because it tells you something important about the difference between the players closest to this situation and the people reacting to it from the outside. Before a matchup against Sophie's team, Griner told reporters that dealing with the whole situation had become annoying as crap. That specific framing, annoying as crap, does not read as a passionate denunciation of Sophie's position or a declaration that she is personally offended by what Sophie said. It reads as someone who is exhausted by the volume of noise that has built up around a single interview answer and is expressing frustration at the noise rather than at the person whose interview answer started it. Some people interpreted it as Griner criticizing Sophie for creating the mess. Others read it as Griner venting about the media circus and the constant questions being directed her way, neither of which she had any particular desire to spend her pregame time addressing. What happened before tip-off did a significant amount of work in clarifying which interpretation was closer to the truth. Cameras caught Sophie and Griner sharing a lighthearted moment on the court before the game started, mimicking a viral finger-point gesture that had been floating around social media in the days prior. The moment was brief and casual and clearly unscripted, the kind of exchange that happens between two professionals who are about to compete against each other and are comfortable enough in that dynamic to be human with each other in the seconds before the competitive structure of the game takes over. That clip did more to settle the question of what was actually happening between these two players than any official league statement or media analysis had managed to accomplish. It showed two people who had become entangled in a national controversy they did not design or invite, handling the situation with a grace that the controversy itself had not always reflected. They disagreed. They were about to compete against each other. And they could still share a normal human moment in the seconds between the warm-up and the opening tip because the noise surrounding them had not actually created the animosity between them that the noise suggested it had. The players closest to the situation have handled it with more dignity than most of the people reacting from the outside. That observation keeps surfacing throughout this entire story because it keeps being confirmed by what actually happens when Sophie and the players she competes against interact directly rather than through the mediated layer of social media posts and press conference questions. The organized crowd response to this controversy has not stayed inside the buildings where the games are being played. It has spilled into the spaces outside them in a way that professional basketball venues are not typically designed to manage. Save Women's Sports signs have started appearing at Sophie's road games in growing numbers, held by fans who have come specifically because of the controversy rather than because of a particular investment in the WNBA standings. Standing across from them at multiple venues have been counter-protesters holding their own signs, expressing opposition to Sophie's position and solidarity with the players and community members who feel her comments created a harmful environment. The two groups have not always remained separated peacefully, and arena security has had to intervene more than once when the tension between opposing sign holders escalated beyond what the standard professional sports crowd management approach was built to handle. Local news stations have started covering the scenes outside the arenas almost as extensively as the games happening inside them. That development is significant because it reflects an editorial judgment that the story happening on the sidewalk is as newsworthy as the story happening on the court, and that judgment reflects how far this controversy has traveled from its origin point in a post-game interview to its current status as a genuine community-level flashpoint in multiple cities. The specific geography of where the largest crowd responses have materialized is worth noting. Portland and Seattle, cities with specific cultural and political identities that make the underlying policy debate particularly charged, have generated the most visible and the most organized external crowd responses. That concentration is not random. It reflects the way that national controversies in sports interact with local political environments, producing larger and more organized reactions in places where the surrounding community has the strongest existing investment in the underlying debate. What the scene outside the arenas communicates most clearly is that Sophie Cunningham's post-game interview answer has connected to something in the broader public that goes well beyond the specific WNBA audience she was addressing when she spoke. People who do not follow professional women's basketball closely enough to know the standings are showing up to road games specifically because of what she said. That level of engagement from outside the sport's existing fan base is either a massive opportunity for the league to expand its audience or a significant management challenge, depending entirely on how the institution responds to it. The league's track record on this specific controversy suggests the management challenge framing is the one currently dominating internal conversations. The WNBA's handling of this entire controversy from the moment Sophie's interview aired has followed a consistent pattern that tells you something about the institution's instincts when the political and cultural dimensions of a story pull in different directions from the basketball dimensions. The pattern is reactive. The league responds to individual incidents after they have generated enough public pressure to make non-response untenable, rather than establishing a clear institutional position in advance that can be applied consistently as new incidents arise. The Catan fine and suspension arriving after days of video-fueled public pressure rather than in the immediate aftermath of a documented incident is the clearest example. But the same pattern runs through every element of the league's response to the broader controversy. Vague statements issued when the noise reaches a threshold, followed by silence when the noise temporarily subsides, followed by another vague statement when the next incident pushes it back above the threshold. That approach is producing a specific outcome that the league does not appear to have fully reckoned with yet. Every time the response arrives late and calibrated to public pressure rather than institutional principle, it confirms the impression that the league's standards are being applied selectively based on who is involved and what the political valence of the situation is, rather than based on consistent principles that apply equally regardless of context. That impression, once formed in the minds of the fans and players and media partners the league depends on, is very difficult to correct through subsequent communication because the communication itself gets evaluated through the lens of the impression rather than on its own terms. The 80-20 reality that several commentators have invoked throughout this conversation is the institutional challenge the league has not yet found a coherent way to address. Surveys consistently show that approximately 80% of the American public holds a position on biological sex in athletic competition that aligns more closely with what Sophie said at the podium than with the position implied by the organized backlash against her. The 20% on the other side is louder, more organized, and more immediately present in the WNBA's core existing audience. The league has been managing toward the 20% because the 20% is visible and vocal in its immediate environment. The 80% is less visible in that specific environment, but is the broader audience the league needs to reach if its commercial growth ambitions are going to materialize into the billion-dollar broadcast deals it has been pursuing. Barkley's comments, and the wave of support from across the sports world that followed them, represent the 80% finding its most prominent voice inside the sports media ecosystem. The question the WNBA's front office now has to answer is whether it is going to acknowledge that the conversation it has been trying to manage into quietness has instead grown into something that requires a direct, principled institutional response, or whether it is going to continue with the reactive, pressure-calibrated approach that has allowed the controversy to keep refreshing itself with new material every time the previous chapter seemed to be closing. The precedent question Barkley raised is the one with the longest institutional shelf life. If a player can be subjected to organized crowd punishment, arena banner campaigns, and the implicit threat of league consequences for answering a direct reporter question honestly in a post-game interview, what does that signal to every other player in the league about the costs of honest public speech on subjects the institution finds uncomfortable? The answer to that question is not just about this controversy or this player. It is about what the WNBA is as an institution in relation to the people whose labor makes it valuable. What this story has produced across the weeks since Sophie Cunningham answered a reporter's question and refused to walk the answer back is a clarity that the controversy itself has been trying to obscure. The clarity is this: a player said something honest in response to a direct question. She said it calmly, framed it in love rather than hostility, and has maintained the same position through every subsequent opportunity to revise it. The organized response to what she said, the booing campaigns, the arena banners, the co-owner who confronted teenagers over a thank you sign, has in almost every instance been conducted with less composure and less grace than the original statement it was responding to. And the voices from across the sports world who have joined the conversation since Barkley opened the door have, with very few exceptions, arrived at the same basic conclusion about what they observed: that Sophie said something a lot of people believe, and that the reaction to it says more about the current cultural climate than it does about the content of what she actually said. Charles Barkley breaking his silence did not create this controversy. He stepped into something that had already been building for weeks, with a platform large enough to ensure that the conversation could no longer be managed through institutional silence or selective league responses calibrated to social media pressure. Once the most prominent voice in basketball commentary says men should not play sports against women, I am done, the conversation stops being containable within the existing management framework the WNBA had been deploying. It becomes a national sports story with a named, prominent advocate attached to it and a growing coalition of equally prominent voices behind him. Sophie Cunningham never asked to be the center of this. She answered a question. She stood by the answer. She responded to every escalation in the backlash with a consistency and composure that the escalation itself could not match. She offered to reach out personally to two teenagers who were made to cry by an adult with institutional power. She shared a human moment with the player most directly connected to the controversy before a competitive game and let that moment communicate something about the difference between the noise surrounding two players and the actual relationship between them. The league has to decide what it is going to do with what has been said and shown, not just about this controversy, but about what it means to be an institution that governs players who hold honest public opinions that the institution finds complicated. That decision is going to define something important about what the WNBA is in this era of its history, at the moment when its commercial ambitions are largest and its institutional credibility is most visibly being tested. Tell us in the comments where you stand and what you think the WNBA owes its players when the conversation gets this complicated and this public.